How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Monday, Yom Sheni. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Monday? Stephen in New Hampshire, Yehud in South Carolina, Renee in Indiana, Guy in Ohio, Melissa in Great Neck, Joe in the Inland Empire, Lucy in Minnesota, Shendor in the Bronx, Bell in Texas, Karen in Northern California, Sharon in New Jersey, Yosef in Sierra Nevada, Paula in the Great Northwest, Bella in Florida, Elle in Southern California, Chaim in Florida, Marjorie in Georgia, Alan in New York City, Bill in Atlanta. Welcome, everybody. Double DAF and a key DAF. Big night. Sanhedrin is such a wonderful tractate. And tonight we come to one of the most famous teachings, two actually, of the most famous teachings in the Talmud. And then I think tomorrow might be a key DAF also, because it contains one of my favorite stories in all of the Talmud. So really wonderful 3-page section. Here we go. We got a good head start on page 36 yesterday. We're continuing our discussion of Mishna number 1 here in chapter 4, and we're picking this up. It's probably good 3/4 of the way down, page 36a, and tonight we'll be doing, God willing, pages 36 and 37. The Mishnah taught that in cases of capital law, the judges commence issuing their opinions from the side benches, where the least significant judges sit. And the Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived? And tonight we'll also be talking about the arrangement of the judges. But just to get that picture, why do we keep talking about judges teaching and students sitting before judges? Well, if you picture the Sanhedrin meeting in the chamber of hewn stone when the temple was standing in Jerusalem, or later when the Sanhedrin was moved to Yavne. So it wasn't just a court for hearing cases. They certainly functioned that way as the highest court of the land. But this was also the center of Torah learning for a Torah-based nation. And so you had essentially the greatest Torah scholars in the land and, their students who are very high Torah scholars themselves, but who are deferring to the highest. And so when you talk about students, yeah, they're students, but it's not like, they're high school kids sitting in front of their teachers. These are the people lined up to become the greatest sages of the land. And we'll be talking a little bit about that succession today. But this general idea, which we're going to discuss right now, is why would you start hearing opinions in the deliberations of a case, especially a capital case where there's going to be at least 23 judges? Why would you start with the least of the judges? Because they're great Torah scholars who defer to the opinions of greater scholars. And especially if Rebbe, the greatest among them, were to speak first, everyone would just have to agree with him. They would want to agree with him because they know that he knows more than him. So that's why we want to hear from people of lesser stature first, so that they won't be intimidated by the opinions of their superiors, as it were. From where are these matters derived? Rav Acha bar Papa says, the verse states, neither shall you answer in a cause, al riv, Exodus 23:2. And the sages interpret, neither shall you answer after the master, al rav, i.e., do not dispute the opinion of the greatest among the judges. Therefore, were the judges to commence issuing their opinions from the greatest of them, he would say that the accused is liable, and no judge would acquit him. No one would disagree with, the scholars that they admire and respect so much above them. So Rabbi Bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan says the source of this practice is from another place in Tanakh, specifically about King David. And when David decided to punish Nabal the Carmelite, the verse states, quote, and David said to his men, every man gird his sword, and every man girded his sword. And David also girded his sword. That's 1 Samuel 25:13. So that was a case of capital law. And David, the greatest among them, was last. Rav says a person may teach his student the relevant material and then judge cases of capital law with him. And this student can thus participate in the deliberations and serve as one of the judges. Again, we're not talking about high school students. We're talking about Talmidim, students of the sages who are themselves already very, very elevated scholars and about to become sages. That's what they're on track to do. So sure, they could serve as judges. And the Gemara raises an objection from a Baraisa, Tosefta 7:2. In cases of ritual purity and impurity, right? If we're going to say, that like we talked about 2 days ago or yesterday, that if a cow had its its womb removed, does that make it a treifa and non-kosher for eating or not? And we saw that there was a disagreement among the sages about that. So that was a case of purity and, well, actually that's not really purity and impurity, that's koshers. But, talking about if somebody came into contact with a creeping thing and it wasn't clear whether it was one of the sheritzim defined in the Torah, and that would render teruma impure, and therefore a priest could not eat it, that would be a question of purity and impurity. So in cases of ritual purity and impurity, if two of the judges are a father and his son, or a teacher and his student, the court counts them as two opinions. Why is that relevant? Because by inference, in cases of monetary law, and cases of capital law, and cases of laws involving the punishment of lashes, as well as court proceedings concerning sanctification of the month and intercalation of the year, if two of the judges are a father and his son, or a teacher and his student, the court counts them as only one opinion, as it is assumed that the son or the student will merely echo the opinion of his father or his teacher. And this contradicts the ruling of Rav, who said that one of the students could be elevated to serve as one of the judges. Page 36b, the Gemara answers, when Rav says his statement, he is referring not to every student, but only those such as Rav Kahana and Rav Asi, who needed to learn the halachic traditions of Rav, but they did not need to learn the reasoning of Rav, as they were capable of conducting their own analyses. They were already great sages. Yes, they deferred to ones even greater than them and wanted to learn from those great sages whatever information and knowledge those great sages could transmit to them. But it's not to say that we're talking about, freshmen in college, right? We're talking about great sages in themselves. Rabbi Bahu says there are 10 ways in which cases of monetary law are different from cases of capital law, as was taught in the beginning of the chapter, and none of them is practical with regard to a court hearing concerning an ox that that is to be stoned, as it is treated as a case of monetary law. After all, we're not killing a person. Somebody might lose his ox. It's very sad, but it's really just a financial hit to him. However, we don't do that with a court of 3 judges. So the only difference between an ox that stands to be executed for killing a person and other cases of monetary law is that the ox that might be stoned, that case is heard by 23 judges because the ox stands to be executed. But in terms of the laws of civil procedure, etc., it's handled like other cases of monetary law. And the Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived? And Rav Acha bar Papa says, as the verse states, you shall not incline the judgment of your poor in his cause. Exodus 23:6. And he explains, you may not incline the judgment of, i.e., exert effort to find liable your poor, but you may incline the judgment of an ox that is to be stoned. The reason for the procedural differences between cases of monetary law and cases of capital law is to render it more likely that one accused of a capital transgression will be acquitted. And this is not a factor when judging the ox, right? We sort of rig the case in favor of the defendant in a capital case because the court is reluctant to issue a verdict, where the man is going to be executed. The court is reluctant to do that lest some mistake be made and a person is killed. And so in terms of civil procedure, the deck is always stacked against finding a verdict of guilty in a capital law case. But we don't do that in monetary law cases where we're just looking for the right answer. Now, the Gemara asks, and likewise with an ox, we're not going to say that we're trying to save the ox at all costs, especially because the ox killed a person. That's why it's having this trial. Now, the Gemara asks, are there really 10 ways in which cases of monetary law are different from cases of capital law? There are only 9 differences recorded in our Mishnah. And the Gemara questions this, but the Mishnah teaches 10 differences, not 9. And the Gemara clarifies, although there appear to be 10, there are in fact 9, because the law that not all are fit to judge cases of capital law, and the law that 23 judges are required for cases of capital law are one. This is one and the same law. The reason that not all are fit to judge cases of capital law is that the court of 23 is derived from the command to Moses, and they shall bear the burden of the people with you. Numbers 11:17, which indicates that only those with you, i.e., similar in lineage to Moses, can serve on that court, as we discussed on page 17a. So the Gemara answers, but there is another difference. As it is taught in a Baraisa, the court does not seat on the Sanhedrin a very old person, or one who is castrated, or one who has no children. This is very interesting. As those who did not recently raise children, or never raised children, may lack compassion. We're not saying that a person who, for whatever reason, never had children is not a compassionate person, but they will not have had the same experience that a parent has had. And we would prefer that somebody, who sits on this court and is going to judge whether to execute a defendant is somebody who had his own children. Rabbi Yehuda adds, even a cruel person is not eligible. And the Gemara comments, and the opposite of this is the law with regard to one who entices others to engage in idolatry. As the merciful one states concerning him, neither shall you spare, neither shall you conceal him. Deuteronomy 13:9. He's still going to have a trial, but he's not going to benefit from all the stringencies which are designed to make it so difficult to execute a defendant. In the case of one who incites others to idolatry, he better hope he's innocent. New subject. The Mishnah teaches that all are fit to judge cases of monetary law. And the Gemara asks, what is added by the Mishnah's employing the expansive term all? All are fit to judge cases of monetary law. So Rav Yehuda says this term serves to include a child born from an incestuous or adulterous relationship, a momzer, right? So the product of a brother and sister who had a child together, or a woman who cheated on her husband with a Jewish man, and the product of that affair was a child. That is a momzer. Very sad designation for the child because he cannot marry other Jews. But a momzer can serve as a judge in a case on a court that is trying cases of monetary law, which tells you that a momzer cannot sit as a judge on a case of capital law. And the Gemara questions this explanation, but we already learned this law elsewhere, as it is taught in a baraisa. All who are fit to judge cases of capital law are fit to judge cases of monetary law. But there are those who are fit to judge cases of monetary law and are not fit to judge cases of capital law. And we discussed it. What is included in the expansive term all employed by the baraisa? And Rav Yehuda says it serves to include a momzer. And the Gemara responds, one of the two sources serves to include a convert who is qualified to judge cases of monetary law, but not cases of capital law. And one of the two sources serves to include a momzer. And the Gemara comments, and both the Mishna and the baraisa are necessary, as the law taught by one source cannot be derived from the law taught by the other source. As if the Tana taught us the fitness to judge cases of monetary law only with regard to a convert, one could say that a convert is like a born Jew concerning this, since he is fit to enter the congregation, i.e. marry a Jew of fit lineage. But with regard to a momzer, who is not fit to enter into the congregation, say that he cannot serve as a judge. And if the Tana taught us the fitness to judge cases of monetary law only with regard to a momzer, one could say that a momzer is fit to judge, as he came from seed of unflawed lineage. But with regard to a convert who does not come from seed of unflawed lineage, because he comes from seed of non-Jews, say that he cannot serve as a judge. Therefore, both sources are necessary. Converts and momzers can serve as judges in cases of monetary law, but both of them cannot serve as judges in cases of capital law. Now the Mishnah teaches, but not all are fit to judge cases of capital law. The judges may be only priests, Kohanim, Levites, or Israelites who are of sufficiently fit lineage to marry their daughters to Kohanim. So the Gemara asks, what is the reason for this? And the Gemara explains, as Rav Yosef taught, just as the court is clean in justice, so too it is clean of any blemish, i.e. it does not include anyone of flawed lineage. And Amaymar says, what is the verse from which it is derived? It states, you are all fair, my love, and there is no blemish in you. Song of Songs 4:7. So the Gemara asks, but perhaps you should say that this is referring to an actual blemish, and is teaching that one who has a physical blemish cannot be appointed to the Sanhedrin. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov says, it is not necessary to learn from this verse the law that one who has a physical blemish cannot be appointed to the Sanhedrin, as the verse states in connection with the transfer of the divine spirit from Moses to the elders, that they may stand there with you. Numbers 11:16. And the term with you is explained to mean with similarity to you, teaching that the members of the Sanhedrin must be whole in body like Moses. So, God forbid, a priest or a judge lost a limb in an accident. That would be tragic. And they could have a very full life in a million different ways, including teaching Torah at the highest levels, but they would not be permitted to judge these kinds of cases, nor, if he's a Kohen, serve as a Kohen to bring sacrifices when the temple is standing. Now, the Gemara rejects this proof, but perhaps those who were with Moses had to be free of any blemish due to the divine presence, which was going to rest upon them. But this is not a requirement for judges to serve on the Sanhedrin. So rather, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, the verse states, so shall they make it easier for you and bear the burden with you. Exodus 18:22, where Moses was just exhausted. He was the only judge for 2 million people, and so he needed help. and God told him you can appoint other judges. And that's what they're talking about here. So about these judges that will be appointed to help Moses judge the people, they shall be similar to you, without blemish. And this verse is referring to the appointment of regular judges, upon whom the divine presence does not rest, and teaches that all members of the Sanhedrin must be whole in body. And the verse from Song of Songs teaches that they must have unflawed lineage as well. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 4. Now, Mishnah number 2. A Sanhedrin of 23 was arranged in the same layout as half of a circular threshing floor, in order that all the judges will see one another and the witnesses. The judges of the Sanhedrin, and we're talking about a lesser Sanhedrin, that's 23 judges, a court of 23, which is what's necessary to hear a case of capital law, where someone is accused of a capital crime and stands to be executed if found guilty. The arrangement of the judges is a semicircle, a half circle. And 2 judges' scribes stand before the court, one on the right and one on the left. And they write the statements of those who find the accused liable and the statements of those who acquit the accused. And that's the law. Right? So as they deliberate and decide whether to convict or acquit, there's one scribe for writing the opinions and the reasons for acquittal, and another scribe who writes down the votes and the reasons of those who are voting for to convict. The minority opinion of Rabbi Yehuda says there were 3 scribes. One writes only the statements of those who acquit the accused, one writes only the statements of those who find him liable, and the 3rd scribe writes both the statements of those who acquit the accused and the statements of those who find him liable, so that if there is uncertainty concerning the precise wording that one of the scribes writes, it can be compared to the words of the 3rd scribe. The law didn't come out that way, but I like it a lot. I think Rabbi Yehuda is very wise, right? That you should have a backup scribe just in case. Now we're on page 37a. The Mishnah continues. And 3 rows of Torah scholars sit before the judges. Right? These are Torah scholars, sages in their own right. But now they are in the role of students of the sages who are the 23 judges before them. 3 rows of Torah scholars sit before the judges, and each and every one among those sitting recognizes his place, i.e., they are seated in accordance with their stature. There's a pecking order of all the Torah scholars who are, poised to be elevated to the Sanhedrin by seniority and by prominence. When the court must ordain an additional judge, for example, if a judge dies during the proceedings, or in the case of a court without a decisive majority when we need to add judges, right? So remember we talked about that you need a supermajority to convict. So let's say they're voting to convict, but it's 12 to 11. Now we have to add more judges until we can get a supermajority of 2. So in this case, the court ordains the greatest of the Torah scholars from the first row. And now that a seat in the first row has become vacant, a Torah scholar from the second row moves to the first row, and a Torah scholar from the third row moves to the second row. And the court selects another Torah scholar from among the assembled, and they seat him in the third row. And this Torah scholar, who moves from the second row to the first row, would not sit in the place of the first Torah scholar who was elevated to become a judge. Rather, he would sit in the place appropriate for him, i.e., at the end of that row, in accordance with his stature, right? So when somebody from the front row gets up and joins the judges, basically all of the Torah scholars are going to have to get up and move over one seat, except for those who are going to actually be promoted from the third row to the second row, or from the second row to the first row. That's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. The Mishnah teaches that the Sanhedrin would sit in a semicircle. So the Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived? And Rabbi Acha Bar Chanina says, We are on page 37a now, if I didn't mention that before. Rabbi Acha Bar Hanina says, as the verse states, your navel is like a round goblet. Let no mingled wine be wanting. Your belly is like a heap of wheat set about with lilies. That's the Song of Songs 7:3. So this verse is interpreted as referring to the members of the Sanhedrin who sit in a semicircle. Your navel, this is an allusion to the Sanhedrin. And why is it called, by way of allusion, your navel? It is because it sits in the navel of the world. Right? The Temple Mount is understood to be the axis mundi and the belly button of the world. What is your belly button? Right? It's the place that you receive nourishment from your mom when you were in her womb. Right? So the place of the Sanhedrin, this is the place that's receiving divine inspiration about matters of Torah law, sort of coming from heaven, going to these scholars, and from them out into the world. This is the navel of the world. Goblet, Agan. This teaches that the Sanhedrin protects, Megina, the entire world with its merit. Round, Hasahar. This teaches that the Sanhedrin is similar to the moon, Sahar, and the court sits in a semicircle like the shape of the moon. Quote, let no mingled wine be wanting. Another phrase from this verse in the Song of Songs. This compares the Sanhedrin to wine mixed with water, which typically involved mixing 2 parts water with 1 part wine. And this teaches that if one member of the great Sanhedrin needed to leave, they see if there are still present in the chamber of hewn stone 23 members, i.e. a third of the judges corresponding to the number of a lesser Sanhedrin, he may leave. But if not, he may not leave. Right? So very interesting. Again, the Sanhedrin, the great Sanhedrin meeting in the chamber of hewn stone at the Holy Temple, it acted as a court for hearing cases that needed such a court. And we saw all 71 judges needed to be present, for example, a case involving the high priest or the king. But it also was the center of Torah learning. And when questions would come up of national importance, they would debate and issue a ruling, a Torah law ruling. Because this is the center from which, all sort of, Torah rulings and law would be supervised throughout the Jewish world, there needed to be a quorum of members of the Sanhedrin present at all times, even if they weren't judging a case. And so there were 71 members of the great Sanhedrin, and 23 of them had to always be in the room, presumably, while the court was in session. I don't know that it needed to be in there, the 23 needed to be in there 24 hours a day. But as long as the court was keeping hours, 23 members had to be in that room. And if somebody needed to go to the bathroom and there were only 23 in the room, he's like, send another one of the judges in here so I can leave the room. The phrase, your belly is like a heap of wheat. This teaches that just as with regard to a heap of wheat, all derive benefit from it, so too, with regard to the Sanhedrin, all derive benefit from their explanations of the Torah. And the phrase, set about with lilies, is said in praise of the Jewish people, as they do not breach even a fence made of lilies, since the Jewish people observe both Torah law as well as rabbinic ordinances and decrees. Somewhat aspirational, since there's so many Jews that are disconnected from Torah law and tradition, but Jews who come to know what our obligations are and the beauty of Torah, then we can count on them to do their best to follow Torah law. They don't need an iron fence keeping them in line. Even a fence of lilies will do. It's a beautiful metaphor. And this is like an incident involving Rav Kahana, as a certain heretic said to Rav Kahana, you say that it is permitted for a menstruating woman to seclude herself with a man, meaning her husband. Is it possible to set fire to chips of kindling and not have them blaze and burn? So what he's saying is, during the time of her menses, husband and wife are prohibited to each other. They cannot touch each other. And not just during her period, but then once her flow ceases, She has to count 7 clean days. And then she goes to the mikveh, immerses, and comes home, and then it's date night for the married couple. But what they're saying is, how can you expect that married people, during the time that they're prohibited to each other, will keep their hands off each other? I mean, does that violate human nature, that a husband and wife will, just be all over each other and they won't be able to resist during this half of the month that they're prohibited to each other? That's what the heretic is asking Rav Kahana. And Rav Kahana said to him, the Torah testifies concerning us that we are set about with lilies, as the Jewish people do not breach even a fence made of lilies. We can count on the Jewish people to observe that prohibition. Reish Lakish says that the source to rely on the Jewish people not to transgress is from a different verse. Your temples, rakatech, are like pomegranate split open. Song of Songs 6:7. Your temples of your head, right, are like a pomegranate split open. What does this teach? That even the empty people among you, reikanin, right, like even the ignorant ones, the simple Jews that don't know a lot of Torah law, even they are as full of mitzvahs as the pomegranate is full of seeds. This is a very, very famous teaching. It's one that the Berditchever Rebbe, among others, loved to quote. That it might be true. It might be true that a lot of people don't learn as much Torah as they should, and yet there is something in the Jewish character which desires God. I can certainly say when I was young and I was very ignorant and just what was not was not a Torah Jew, was just didn't even know how many mitzvahs I was failing to do. Nevertheless, I was very drawn to God and interested in God. I wanted to know more about God. It always made sense to me that God existed and that a world wouldn't come into being for no reason. And I was very curious about God. And that Jews, have a desire to be compassionate, have a desire to help others and take care of other members of the community. And enjoy learning Torah when it's presented to them, by good teachers. And so even the simplest among them is as full of mitzvahs as a pomegranate is full of seeds. Now there's another teaching, I think it's from the Ger Rebbe, who says, well, if every Jew is as full of mitzvahs as a pomegranate is full of seeds, then how could you call any Jew wicked? Why would any Jews get punished for anything? And I think what he taught is that how are pomegranate's seeds actually contained, right? There's many, many seeds. That's what you eat in a pomegranate, right? The seeds, the fruit is its seeds. But the problem with those seeds, which a pomegranate is so full of, is that each seed is encased in a membrane. And so the seeds actually aren't all connected to each other. And it's like, for Jews that don't have a lot of Torah learning or any, right, that they have a lot of mitzvahs in them, but they're not amounting to a unified whole that is sort of, directing that Jew in the right direction, with Torah knowledge and, a much higher level of service to God that you would have with some Torah learning and learning the tradition and doing the kind of learning we're doing here enables us to serve at a higher level in every way. So even one who is full of mitzvahs, if the mitzvahs aren't kind of adhering to each other in a unified whole, then it's not as good. Right? But anyway, this is that place, Sanhedrin 37a, very, very famous teaching. Very famous teaching. Even the simple ones among you are as full of mitzvahs as a pomegranate is full of seeds. Rabbi Zera says that the source is from here, that Jews tend, right, to follow the law to the best of their ability. The verse states concerning the occasion when Isaac blessed Jacob, and he smelled the smell of his garments and blessed him and said, see, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. Genesis 27:27. Do not read his garments, begadav, rather read his traitors, bogedav, meaning that even traitors and sinners among the Jewish people have qualities like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. The Gemara relates there were certain hooligans. Excuse me. There were certain hooligans, Biryone, who were living in the neighborhood of Rabbi Zera. And he brought them close, i.e., he treated them with friendship in order to cause them to atone for their sins, to repent of their sins and distance themselves from sin. But the other sages disapproved of his actions. They didn't think that these people, were likely to repent of their sins, and perhaps they thought that Rabbi Zera was wasting his time, or really sort of exposing himself to a sordid influence. When Rabbi Zera died, those hooligans said, "Until now, there was the short one with singed legs." That's a description of Rabbi Zera, who would pray for compassion for us, who would pray that heaven should have compassion on us. Now that he is gone, who will pray for us? Who will pray for compassion for us now? And they thought about this in their hearts, and they repented. Ultimately, Rabbi Zera's actions were proven correct, as these people did repent. And finally, because this discussion of Mishnah number 2 is very short, the Mishnah teaches that there are 3 rows of Torah scholars who sit before the court. And if one of the Torah scholars from the first row is elevated to a place on the court, the Torah scholar in the first position of the second row moves to the final position of the first row. And Abaye says, learn from the Mishnah that when they move, i.e. when the Torah scholars need to move as a result of one of them being promoted to the court, they all move. And the Gemara inquires, but let the one being moved from the first position of the second row to the last position of the first row say to the court, until now I was sitting at the head of the row, but now you are seating me at the tail, i.e. at the end of the row. And Abaye says in explanation, this is not a valid claim, as the court can say this to him, be a tail to the lions and do not be a head to the foxes. And this is actually quoting Pirkei Avos 4:15, quite a famous saying there. It is better to be a tail to lions than a head to foxes, right? Always aspire to be in the company of people much greater than yourself, where you'll be humble and learn from them. It's better for you than being the leader of a bunch of people who are, only going to drag you down. And that is the conclusion of our discussion of Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 4. Now, Mishnah number 3, and this is why we're in a key DAF. This is a super famous Mishnah. Mishnah number 3 in chapter 4 of Tractate Sanhedrin here on page 37b. I'm sorry, 37a. We're still on 37a. Okay. How does the court intimidate the witnesses in giving testimony for cases of capital law, right? How do you impress on the witnesses that they better tell the truth? By the way, right, I think we talked about this a little bit because I just looked into it. Because I told that joke about the president, the first Jewish president, swearing on a Bible and what his mom says in the front row. I won't tell the joke now and ruin it. But the point is that I got a lot of comments when I shared that joke on Instagram of why would a Jew swear on a Bible? So there's actually some nuance to that because I think what the people meant is that we don't have a Bible. That's ridiculous. Now, Jews don't hold by the Christian Bible, but 3/4 of the Christian Bible is the Hebrew Bible. And we certainly hold by our Bible, also called Tanakh. Tanakh is an acronym for Torah, Nevi'im, or prophets, and Ketuvim, or writings. Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. And that accounts for the Hebrew Bible. So sure, we have a Bible, and if somebody was going to swear on something, because he's holding public office or because he's being called to testify as a witness in court, and he's a Jew, he could swear on the Hebrew Bible. But But, as we've seen many times, our sages are constantly telling us, avoid making a nader, avoid swearing an oath on anything, because the Torah does speak about oaths. And when you swear an oath, right? So, for example, if a person, God forbid, swore that he's never going to have bananas, right? Then if he ever ate a banana, that would be a transgression. And it's super discouraged to do something like that because God permitted you to eat bananas. A Jew is permitted to eat bananas. And if he made bananas forbidden to him, then it's like he would be changing, he would be prohibiting on himself what God had permitted. And there's no reason to do that. And it sets you up, for this possible transgression. So a Jew is instructed in strong terms to avoid swearing oaths at all costs. Now, we saw that there are times when in a court it would be demanded of you to swear an oath. Like if you say, somebody claims that you owe him money and you say, well, you're saying I owe you $100. I say I owe you $50. So you have a partial admission. In that case, if you don't want to pay the other $50, you have to swear an oath. So there are times when we swear, and when you swear, you would have your hands on a holy object like a Tanakh. But you're meant to avoid that. And so actually in American courts, you don't have to swear on a Bible. You don't have to swear at all. You can affirm that you are going to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And they just want to impress on you the gravity of the situation, and that if you lie as a witness, right, it would be perjury. Okay, how do they impress witnesses in a Beis Din, in a rabbinic court, and particularly in a case of capital law, where if you lie, the defendant might end up being executed because of your lie, or because of your faulty testimony that amounts to a lie? So how do they make sure that witnesses get that they need to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So they would bring the witnesses in and intimidate them by saying to them, perhaps what you say in your testimony is based on conjecture, right? Okay, you think you're telling the truth, but think carefully about it. How did you arrive at your understanding of the facts of this case? Maybe you're filling in stuff that you guessed happened, but you didn't see it, right? It's based on conjecture. Or perhaps it is based on a rumor. Perhaps it is testimony based on hearsay. For example, you heard a witness testify to this in a different court, and so you assume it is true, but you didn't see it with your eyes. Or perhaps your understanding of what happened in this case is based on the statement of a trusted person. Somebody that you trust implicitly told you what happened, but you didn't see it. You are not permitted to testify what happened unless you saw it, right? And that's what they're warning. Now, perhaps you do not know that ultimately we examine you with inquiry and interrogation. And if you are lying, your lie will be discovered. And the court tells them, you should know that cases of capital law are not like cases of monetary law. In cases of monetary law, a person who testifies falsely causing money to be given to the wrong party can give the money to the proper owner and his sin is atoned for. In cases of capital law, if one testifies falsely, the blood of the accused and the blood of his offspring that he did not merit to produce because he was executed, all this blood is ascribed to the witness's testimony until eternity. If your false testimony that you didn't even realize was false because you were just basing on something you heard turns out to be the testimony by which we convict this man and execute him, his blood will be on your soul forever. And not just his blood, but the bloods of his children that he might have had if he hadn't been executed. All those debts are on your soul forever. That's a heavy warning that the judges give to the witnesses in a capital case. And the proof for this is so famous. The proof for this is, as we found with Cain, as in Cain and Abel, who killed his brother. As it is stated concerning him, when God says to Cain, right, where's your brother? And God says, the voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. That's how it's normally translated into English, but that's not what it says, because the word for blood is deme. Deme or demai, right? Deme. And deme doesn't mean blood. Deme means bloods. Your brother's bloods. Plural. The verse does not state your brother's blood, dam, in the singular, but rather your brother's blood, deme, in the plural. And this serves to teach that the loss of both his brother's blood and the blood of his brother's offspring are ascribed to Cain. Abel never merited to marry and have kids. Think of it. It was Adam and Eve, and then they had two sons, and one son killed the other. Abel would have fathered half of humanity, right? Half of humanity. But Cain killed him. So all those people who never came into being, that's on Cain. The Mishna, so the blood and the blood of his brother's offspring are ascribed to Cain. And the Mishna notes, alternatively, the phrase your brother's blood, deme, written in the plural, teaches that his blood was not gathered in one place, but was splattered on the trees and on the stones. Now the court tells the witnesses, therefore, Adam, the first man, was created alone to teach you that with regard to anyone who destroys one soul from the Jewish people, i.e. he kills one Jew, the verse ascribes him blame as if he destroyed an entire world. As Adam was one person from whom the population of the entire world came forth. And conversely, anyone who saves one soul from the Jewish people, the verse ascribes him credit as if he saved an entire world. One who saves one soul, it's like he saved the whole world. And one who destroys one soul, it's as if he killed the whole world. Very famous saying. I'm sure you've heard it before. The Mishnah cites another reason. Adam, the first man, was created alone. The Mishnah cites another reason why Adam, the first man, was created alone. Right? God said, we're going to make man, humankind. There's two creation stories. One is that he made man and woman. And then the other creation story is he made Adam and then took from Adam's side Eve, right? There are two creation stories in Genesis. One is kind of brief. God made man and woman. And then the other is God made man, presented to him all the animals to name, but there was no mate for him, and then caused sleep to come on him and took from his side a piece of his body and made woman out of that. Two creation stories. Adam is the same. Eve has two creation stories, or woman has two creation stories. And I've actually taught this before, that from this the sages derive elsewhere. I think it's in Yevamos 63b. The sages derive that first creation of woman, that's Lilith. That was woman 1.0, right? And that did not work out. And so all women are descended from woman 2.0, Eve. And that's actually your source in the Talmud for why women are higher spiritual stature than men. Men didn't get a 1.0 and a 2.0. We're still struggling to evolve to 2.0. Women, right from the beginning, had a higher, more evolved state, and that's why women are considered to be spiritually on a higher level than men. That is what our tradition teaches. Okay. But here what we're talking about is why didn't God, when he was making the humans, just start with, 10 men and 10 women? Seems like it would have made almost like more sense, right? Since it started one family at the very beginning. Okay, well, I guess brothers had to marry sisters until there was enough people that, the families were more spread out than that. So why didn't God just create 10 men and 10 women and let humanity start from that? Why did God start with one man and one woman, and initially one man? And says the Gemara, or says the Mishnah, and this was done due to the importance of maintaining peace among people, so that one person will not say to another, my father is greater than your father, meaning my progenitor is greater than your progenitor, because we're all from Adam. We're all equal. No one's better than anyone else. No human is better than other humans because we're all descendants of Adam. And it was also so that the heretics who believe in multiple gods will not say that there are many authorities in heaven and each created a different person. Rather, there's one God, and God created all of humanity from one progenitor. And this serves to tell of the greatness of the Holy One, blessed be He. As when a person stamps several coins with one seal, they are all similar to each other. But the supreme King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He, stamped all people with the seal of Adam, the first man, as all of them are his offspring, and not one of them is similar to another. Therefore, since all humanity descends from one person, each and every person is obligated to say, the world was created for me, as one person can be the source of all humanity and recognize the significance of his actions. Right? If all the people in the world could come from one person, then any person can be the progenitor of generations of, wonderful people or terrible people. I mean, everyone is capable of producing a world full of people like Adam was. And the court says to the witnesses, and perhaps you will say, now we're on 37b, why would we want this trouble? Perhaps it would be better not to testify at all. Right, now that we've intimidated the witnesses so much that if you mess up, if you say something that's not true, and the defendant ends up being executed because of you, this blood will be on your hands and on your soul, not just for your lifetime, but for all eternity. So maybe the witness is like thoroughly intimidated and says, okay, you know what? I don't want to testify. No. If a witness says, and perhaps you will say, why would we want this trouble? Perhaps it would be better not to testify at all. Well then, beware. As is it not already stated, quote, and he, being a witness, whether he has seen or known, if he does not utter it, then he shall bear his iniquity. Leviticus 5:1. It is a transgression not to testify when one can do so. If one knows information that should be heard in a court, he must utter it. And perhaps you will say, why would we want to be responsible for the blood of this person? But beware, as is it not already stated, when the wicked perish, there is song. Proverbs 11:10. It's a very serious matter to execute a defendant. But if somebody is truly wicked and deserving of execution, then it is very good for the whole world that he be executed. And that concludes Mishnah number 3 here in chapter 4. Now the Gemara. The sages taught in a Baraisa. How does the court describe testimony based on conjecture? The court says to the witnesses, perhaps you saw this man about whom you are testifying pursuing another man into a ruin, and you pursued him, and you found a sword in his hand dripping with blood, and the one who was ultimately killed was convulsing. Let's review that. You saw one guy chasing another guy with a sword in his hand into a ruin. A ruin so there's no other people there. Or you wouldn't expect there to be other people there. And then you follow them in because you think maybe I can, save someone. It seems like a murderer, a wicked person is chasing an innocent person. Maybe that's what it is, into a building. And so you rush in to see if you can help. And when you enter the building, you see the one with the sword standing over the other guy, and the guy on the ground is convulsing, right, with his stab wounds, meaning he is in the throes of death. He's about to die. And the one standing over him is holding a sword dripping with blood, right? The smoking gun, in other words. Now, you would conclude, obviously, this guy who's standing with the sword dripping with blood must have killed the guy on the ground, who's now about to die, who's dying in front of me. Obviously, right? Yeah, but you can't testify that you saw that guy kill the other guy. You saw a man run into a building chasing another man, and you saw the pursuer holding a sword. And when you entered the room, you saw that man standing over the other man holding a sword dripping with blood, and the man on the ground convulsing. That you can testify. But you cannot say that you saw that man kill this man because you didn't see him stab him. You didn't see that. And who knows? Maybe something strange happened. Maybe there was another person here and he stabbed the guy. And the one who was actually running with the sword knew that there was another bad person around, and he was trying to stop and save the one who was running from the killing. And in fact, he pulled the sword out of the guy. Certainly in movies, there's all kinds of stuff that looks one way until the detective starts investigating and turns out it was something else. So you can only testify what you saw, not what you think happened during the period when you weren't looking. If you saw only this, right? That you come in and there's a guy holding a sword dripping with blood and the one on the ground convulsing. If you saw only this, it is as if you saw nothing. And you cannot testify to the murder. It is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach said as an oath, I will not see the consolation of Israel if I did not once see one person pursue another into a ruin, and I pursued him and saw a sword in his hand dripping with blood, and the one who was ultimately killed was convulsing. In other words, Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach actually had this exact situation, which is normally cited as an example of why you can't testify about things that you only surmised happened. Rather, you can only testify about what you saw with your eyes. That's always given as a hypothetical, but he actually experienced this. He saw a guy chase another guy into a ruin, the pursuer holding a sword, and then Shimon ben Shattach entered that building. And when he walked in, he saw the pursuer standing there with his sword dripping with blood, and the pursuee, the one who was fleeing, now on the ground, stabbed, and his body convulsing, and he died. So Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach said, and I said to him, the one holding the sword dripping with blood, and I said to him, wicked person, who has killed this man? Either you or I, right? There's no one else here. It's Shimon ben Shattach saying, I know I didn't kill him, so it must be you. But what can I do? Since your blood is not given over to me, meaning me as a judge. Why? Because as the Torah states, at the mouth of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses shall he that is to die be put to death. And I did not witness you killing him. But the one who knows, meaning God, the one who knows one's thoughts shall punish this man who killed another. And the sages said, they did not move from there before a snake came and bit the murderer, and he died. It's like Shimon ben Shattach said, I'm not going to be able to convict you because I'm the only witness here, and I didn't see you kill him. So as far as a legal proceeding is concerned, you're going to get away with this. But I call on heaven, who witnessed your deed, to avenge the death of an innocent person. And, Shimon ben Shattach was quite a lofty soul and a righteous person. And the curse of the righteous happened immediately. A snake came and bit that man and he died. The Gemara, and now I'm almost done. So please, if you have questions or comments, get them in now. Now the Gemara questions this account. But was this murderer fit to die by being bitten by a snake? But doesn't Rav Yosef say, and so the school of Chizkiah also taught, from the day that the temple was destroyed, although the Sanhedrin ceased to exist, at least as it did when it met in the chamber of hewn stone, the 4 types of court-imposed capital punishment have not ceased. And the Gemara asks, have they really not ceased? But they have ceased, as court-imposed capital punishment is no longer given after the temple was destroyed, right? There were courts in Israel that might have given the death penalty, but they weren't rabbinic courts, right? They were courts of the king. or of the Romans, etc. When they were subject to foreign rule at this late Second Temple period. Rather, the intention is that the halacha, the law of the 4 types of court-imposed capital punishment, has not ceased to be applicable. So what does that mean? Simple meaning would be, okay, we don't have rabbinic courts who have the stature in the post-temple period to impose the death penalty. Right? We're going to look to other sources. We're going to look to civil courts for that. But we still study those laws, right? And what are the 4 kinds of capital punishment? Right? Is it hanging, beheading with the sword, stoning, and burning? Right? So there are 4, depending on the crime. The Torah specifies that there are 4 kinds of capital punishment. And we certainly study those laws, even like many laws, like the laws of bringing sacrifices in the temple. We're certainly not able to do that, but we still study those laws with great fervor. And in fact, that's how we do the service of bringing sacrifices now that there is no temple. So we still study these laws of the death penalties. But that's not what the Gemara is talking about here. Now, the Gemara explains, how so? For one who would be liable to be executed by stoning, either he falls from a roof or an animal mauls him and breaks his bones. We take it as a matter of faith that somebody who gets away with murder will not get away with murder. God will arrange for that murderer to meet his untimely end. So if he would have been subject to a court-sanctioned execution by stoning, and stoning, by the way, doesn't mean that people throw rocks at him, right? Stoning means he gets thrown off a cliff. So if he would have been liable to be executed by stoning, either he ends up falling off a roof or an animal mauls him and breaks his bones, like would have happened if he fell. This death is similar to death by stoning, in which one is liable to be executed, is pushed from a platform, and his bones break from the impact of the fall. For one who would be liable to be executed by burning, either he falls into a fire and is burned, or a snake bites him, as a snake bite causes a burning sensation. For one who would be liable to be executed by slaying through decapitation by the sword, either he is turned over to the authorities and they execute him with a sword, or robbers come upon him and murder him. And one who would be liable to be executed by strangling either drowns in a river and is choked by the water, or he dies of diphtheria, bisronichi, which causes his breathing to become constricted. So according to this, a murderer whose verdict in court would be death by slaying should not be bitten by a snake. It would be the wrong punishment. And the sages say in explanation, that murderer, right, that Shimon ben Shattak saw, but he didn't quite see it, right? He didn't see the actual stabbing, even though he knows it happened. That murderer had another sin for which he deserved execution by burning. It wasn't his first murder. And as the master says, one who is found liable by the court to receive 2 types of court-imposed capital punishment is sentenced to the harsher of the 2, and burning is considered a harsher death than slaying. And that's why that guy ended up getting bit by a snake and dying from that. And that's where we will break off. Let me take some questions or comments on this fascinating pair of pages, Sanhedrin 36 and 37. Sharon, could it also be that even the greatest of teachers can still learn from their students? Absolutely. As Pirkei Avos says, who is wise? One who learns from all others. That learning might not happen if the students spoke last. Just so. And not only that, right, we have elsewhere in Pirkei Avos, right, that I have learned much from my teachers, but I have learned the most from my students. Yosef, there are verses in the Torah that mention one law for the stranger and native born, from Exodus 12, Numbers 15, and Leviticus 24. This, like all can judge monetary matters, must be qualified specifically. In the case of judges, can one who is not quite a convert but lives among Israel judge? I'm sure not. You're saying like the Ger Toshav, the resident alien, can he judge monetary matters? I'm guessing no, because he's not a Jew. You know, something that's 99% kosher is 100% not kosher, right? So he might be close to being a Jew, but he's not a Jew. It may be a Ger Toshav is permitted to judge because at least he follows the Noahide laws and he resides in Israel. But my impression is that what we've seen so far is you have to be a Jew. So somebody who's in the process of conversion is not a Jew yet, and I think he would be excluded from judging. Chaim in Florida. Moses was not blemish-free. He spoke with a lisp. How does that mesh with judges needing to be blemish-free like Moses? So I would assume that that's not counted as a blemish. For the kind of blemish we're talking about here, losing a limb would be. Losing an eye certainly would be. And I'm not sure. We haven't really encountered the definitions of what kind of blemish is going to disqualify. Bill. When I was a very young man, I read an old bit of Appalachian folklore, a sort of kind of midrash really, called The Walk-Off People. And the short version, like many such stories, it's better told out loud, is that the kids grow up and Eve feels lonely at home and demands that Adam either find her someone to talk to or she won't let him spend all day fishing anymore. So Adam goes to God and God agrees to make more people with Adam's help so that they'll still be Adam's children, as it were. And he gets Adam to cut branches to make bones and then cover them in clay, and God makes them into people. And then God tells Adam, now I'm going to go sit with Eve, and we're going to make all these people some brains. And you stay there, you stay here and keep an eye on them. But no sooner than God is gone, than Adam sneaks off to go fishing, and all the new people wake up and walk off, which is why all throughout the world you find so many folks what ain't got no brains. That's pretty good. A nice midrash. That's not scripture, but it's a nice midrash. Thank you for sharing that. That's what I've got for us today. And tomorrow, it's funny you're mentioning this, Bill. We do have a story about God considering with God's colleagues, the angels, not colleagues on God's level, obviously, but eternal creatures dwelling in Shemaim, in heaven with God. And God consults with them about creating the people. And the angels say, you sure you want to do that? That story is tomorrow, and it's a personal favorite of mine. So tune in tomorrow, Tuesday, regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. All the best.